When you see the words of the president written out on Truth Social this morning, the idea that a whole civilization, this is his words, will die tonight, how seriously do you take that threat?
So I think at the end of the day, threats like that are just simply unhelpful. I certainly hope that the president of the United States, and I don't think he is, threatening, what that statement suggests. I think, it's much more likely that we would see the targeting of the infrastructure targets like has been widely discussed. But these maximalist demands, frankly, from both sides, simply move the parties further and further away from a negotiated solution. And I think what is true today has been true throughout this conflict, and that is that there is no military solution here. If we think that continuing to coerce the Iranians will lead to capitulation, I think we continue to misassess where that regime is. And so deadlines, maximalist demands, I think are fundamentally very unhelpful at this stage.
Well, as you speak of the regime, Jen, obviously that first line of the president's Truth Social post is the one that has captured a lot of attention today. But he also said in that same posting, now that we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary wonderful can happen. Who knows, he says. Have we seen complete and total regime change?
We absolutely have not. If anything, the new supreme leader and the new leadership of Iran is even more ideological and more hardlined than what we started this conflict with. And so, again, I go back to, I think that the administration is not understanding where the Iranian regime is and its resilience and ability to withstand pressure. This regime is evil. And I think many of us share that opinion with the administration. They are not concerned about the well-being of their citizens. And so if we think that they are going to capitulate based on threats against the Iranian people, I think that's, again, fundamentally a misunderstanding. This regime is ideological, and for it, in this moment, survival is the number one concern, and survival does not come through again, in their eyes, capitulation to U.S. demands. There has to be a negotiated solution, whether that happens in the next 12 hours, the next 24 hours, or in the next 2 months. That is the only way that we see this. But no, regime change has not taken place.
Well, so let's dig in more to the potential negotiated solution. We have gotten, to phrase it delicately, mixed messages, Jen. I also could say that I am just frankly very confused as to what exactly the status is of negotiations, as we're seeing conflicting reports as to whether or not Iran's even still at the proverbial negotiating table, or at the very least participating in these messages being back and forth. You have the New York Times reporting suggesting that is not the case, that they have walked away. At the very same time, the likes of Axios are saying some progress has been made in the last 24 hours. Typically, with your experience in diplomacy, when things are so hard to understand where exactly we stand, does that actually mean progress is being made, or is that an indication of the absence of that?
So that's a great question. And my suspicion is that actually progress is being made. That may be overly optimistic, but I think that what we are seeing is indication that there is some movement between the two sides. You talk about the proverbial negotiating table. I do not think there is a table that they are sitting at. Mm-hmm. This is primarily messages being passed back and forth. But I do think what we are seeing is the beginning stage of discussions that will eventually form the foundation to end this conflict. Again, though, at the moment, I think both parties have very maximalist demands. And so those two things can be true at the same time. There can be a willingness to talk or to consider positions and even to compromise eventually. But that compromise may not be enough in the short term.
Well, and we're talking about this, Jen, as if there really are just two sides here. But Israel has been a factor this entire time. It has been Israel and the United States acting in tandem, a joint effort when it comes to the attacks on Iran. Do they really have any role to play in diplomacy here? Does it matter what Israel would like to see if Israel has maximalist demands of its own?
So I think the role that Israel has to play here is one of a spoiler. Certainly, as we've been talking about since before the conflict began, this for Prime Minister Netanyahu is a fight that he has been wanting to wage for 2 decades. And the Israeli government's objective in this will be to eliminate the ability of Iran to strike out against Israel. And if this conflict ends today, presumably by some agreement, and today, tomorrow, whatever the time frame is, but presumably by some agreement to get the Strait of Hormuz open. And I think it must be said that a month ago, when this conflict began, the Strait of Hormuz was also open then. But that seems to be one of the key objectives of the administration now. So if the negotiated solution is that the Strait of Hormuz is open and global commerce can get back to normal, and Iran has some assurance that this fight will not be taken to them again, that leaves big questions about the nuclear program in particular. Specifically because we go back to this regime has not changed. And in fact, coming out of this conflict, it is my expectation that the new leadership of Iran will feel more motivated than they ever have before to pursue nuclear weapons. And so if that highly enriched uranium remains inside of Iran's borders and is not addressed through some negotiated solution, then for Israel, that is going to be a very problematic outcome. And so, we could see a scenario, and I think the Iranians will look at Gaza as an example on this. We could see a scenario in which the United States tries to find that off-ramp and comes to some agreement. But for Israel, that doesn't necessarily mean that they stop trying to provoke further, either executing or trying to provoke further conflict.
Well, your point on the nuclear program, Jen, is really important. Are you effectively saying that the U.S. cannot both simultaneously say it has guaranteed Iran will never have a nuclear weapon and guarantee to Iran it will never attack again, at least so long as that enriched uranium remains in Iran's hands?
Yeah, so I go back to the timelines that we're talking about today. 8 o'clock tonight, perhaps, the president agreeing to extend it again in order to allow for the negotiations. If there is going to be a negotiated solution to this conflict, and again, eventually that's what it has to be. There is no military solution here. If there is to be a negotiated solution to this conflict, those macro questions are going to have to come into play. What are you going to do about the highly enriched uranium? What are you going to do about the knowledge that has been gained by the regime in the long term? And I think to address some of those questions, there are going to have to be compromises on the side of the United States as well. What are they willing to offer Iran in exchange for that, potentially in the way of, for example, sanctions relief? And so, if we do see a deal in the near term, again, whether that is today, tomorrow, sometime next week, those questions are not going to be resolved, making it very, very likely that there is a return to conflict, proverbial mowing of the grass, as many would call it, before too long. Something, again, we can't forget that we did this just last June. And so I do think that finding the space for a real diplomatic solution that addresses the wide range of legitimate concerns of the United States, of Israel, but also of Iran, is absolutely essential to a lasting peace.
But Jen, and we just have 30 seconds left here, you don't think a solution that would require that much work can realistically be reached and finalized by 8 p.m. tonight?
Absolutely not. And that's where, again, these deadlines that the president continues to throw out are, at the end of the day, I think, counterproductive.